All right, we're calling this meeting to order at almost 2 o'clock sharp, July 15th, 2021. This is the Strategic Planning Committee made up of myself, Director Barrett, and Director Johnson to discuss joint recycled water project with the Montecito Water District and enhanced feasibility study. So let's see here. So we've called it to order. So now Betsy, any public comment? Anybody with a hand raised?
Members of the public, if you wish to address the committee on items not on the agenda, you may use the raise hand function in Zoom and unmute yourself and use your video. Director Barrett, I hope you don't mind if I repeat myself because we just had an additional member of the public join the meeting. So we're on item 2 of the agenda. And if members of the public would like to address the committee, they can unmute themselves and use the raise hand function now. Director Barrett, I see no hands raised.
Oh, okay, thank you. So we'll go to number 3A. And I just read that. Thank you. There's the agenda. The joint recycled water project with the Montecito Water Department and enhanced feasibility study. We're going to receive a presentation from the Carollo Engineers, Inc. related to the enhanced recycled water feasibility study. So are we ready to go with that now, do you think?
So we have Andy Salveson and Rob Morrow on. Andy, did you want to present the PowerPoint, or would you like me to bring it on the screen? And you can say next slide if you like.
I'd be happy to bring it up. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to stop my share and hopefully it'll allow you to share your screen.
All right, please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, and thank you again. Once again, my name is Andy Salveson. I'm with Carollo Engineers. I'm here with Rob Morrow from WSC. I'd like to thank director, board members, and staff for the opportunity to talk to you all today. Rob, are you ready to go as well? Want to test your sound for me?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you quite
cool.
well. All
And
right.
you can go to presentation mode if it works on your screen.
Yeah, I was going to keep it. I was going to keep it. Is it too small?
It's good for me.
Okay. All right. I was going to keep it like this. Sometimes it goes a little wonky when I try to, it projects somewhere else. I can't even find it anymore. All right. Well, so today we're talking about the enhanced recycled water feasibility analysis. And it's a very short presentation, a total of 12 slides. So the goal is to talk through these slides first, but if folks really want to interject with questions or comments, that's perfectly fine. So first, just a brief project overview. I know you're all familiar with the project, but I figure 2 slides would be useful, and then I'll go through the tasks, and some of these tasks will be led by Rob and his team, so I will turn it over to Rob as well. So just a reminder of the project goals, and I'm going to read through them, so bear with me. First, explore and develop recycled water alternatives for the Montecito Sanitary District and Montecito Water District. Second, build upon and update prior work from the 2018 MWD Recycled Water Facilities Plan. We call that the RWFP. Try not to use too many acronyms, but we kind of like them as engineers, right? Develop specific water reuse projects in which reuse of MSD's average dry weather flow is maximized. Evaluate the MSD wastewater treatment plant. This scope has what we call a mini master plan, and we'll get into details on what that means. Second to last bullet, provide a cost benefit analysis, and the cost estimates we do are called a level 5, which has an accuracy of +50 to -30%. So it's intended to allow comparisons of ideas and to provide a reasonable conservative cost estimate that can be used for budgeting purposes. And this will be, this cost benefit analysis will be sufficient for the districts to determine appropriate recycled water projects for the community as a whole. And then the last item is evaluate potential regional collaboration with Santa Barbara and Carpinteria. And we're going to get through each of these. We are looking at several different potential water reuse alternatives. Starting with number one, which is a large non-potable water reuse project in Montecito. The second is collaboration with Carpinteria. And that would be examining 2 of 3 potential options. And I'll take a moment and talk through these. One option may be, and I say maybe, raw wastewater that is conveyed to Carpinteria, in which they would treat that raw wastewater, recycle that raw wastewater, and purify that wastewater until it is exceeding and better than drinking water quality. And I want to point out that if you're sending raw wastewater from Montecito, you're sending it all. So you can't just send the average dry weather flow, for example, and then treat peak wet weather at Montecito, because the biology wouldn't be able to handle that. Second option is to send secondary effluent, so it's been treated at Montecito, and then it's sent. And a third one would be to send purified water, and that water would then just be injected into the groundwater basin, later extracted and used as new water. Item number 3, potable reuse in Montecito, raw water augmentation. So the state of California has draft regulations for direct potable reuse, something we've been intimately involved with and helping to guide. And the one option is to send purified recycled water that meets all drinking water standards, but you send it to the head of a water treatment plant. Option 3B would be sending that purified water directly into the potable water distribution system. Again, these are things that are being carefully evaluated and regulated within the state of California. And we are at a position now where people can start to realistically look at implementing these types of projects in the state of California. And then item 4 is collaboration with Santa Barbara. Similar to Carpinteria, we're talking about options of sending raw wastewater or secondary effluent to Santa Barbara, and that would lead to a potable reuse via raw water augmentation, which would mean send the purified water ahead of the Cater water treatment plant. And again, we're not speaking for Carpinteria or Santa Barbara in this meeting or this conversation. There's a lot of discussions that have to happen with them. But just for perspective, you know, in Santa Barbara's prior work, they have looked at a timeline of around 2035 to potentially implement direct potable reuse. Pause there. I'm about to switch to the detailed project tasks, which I may repeat myself a little bit. Just want to see if there's any questions. Yes, Director.
Andy, quick question. So direct potable reuse is essentially straight. There's no 60-day holding period. It goes straight into the system, right?
That's exactly right. So the state of California for indirect potable reuse has assigned a certain amount of time that they want that water in the groundwater basin or in a surface water reservoir, and 60 days is the minimum time. So as soon as you even go to 59 days, it's actually considered direct potable reuse, even though it's really much closer to indirect.
Okay. And then for the city of Santa Barbara, they're saying this law may be passed. I guess people are talking about it possibly 2023. Is that timeline?
Yeah. So the law that was passed that mandated moving ahead with regulations did say complete by 2023, end of 2023. It may extend a little beyond that, but I'll give the state a lot of credit. The Division of Drinking Water, DDW, they're the people that do this. They have done a really good job of getting out ahead of it, and their draft regulations they have are very detailed, frankly, a little too detailed. And so we have a lot of confidence in what it would take to implement DPR at this point.
And so if the law is passed in 2023, the city of Santa Barbara is not ready to start doing it for another 12 years.
Yeah, again, I apologize. I don't want to speak for Santa Barbara, but in their planning documents, they've looked at it in terms of 2035 as being a timeline for when they may need additional water supplies beyond their current ones.
Oh, so they have plenty of water for right now, potable.
That's the message I'm hearing.
Oh, interesting. Because of the desal plant?
That's right.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about project tasks. I have 5 slides on the project task and then a summary. So let's go through them each because this, our scope and budget, there's a lot of hours in there and hence there's a lot of cost in there. And so we want to make sure that we're very clear about the value that we're going to be bringing on each of these items. So we start with task 1, which is document reviews and meetings. And I'm just going to work through this table if everyone doesn't mind. So on the left side, we have the work items. So we're going to start right off by reviewing relevant documents. Now, we're going to be pretty efficient there because some of that relevant work was done by Rob Morrow in the past. And so we're very glad that he's part of the team to help us work through and not have to spend too much time in that first item. Second item is review of direct potable reuse regulations. So, because they're draft, there's some uncertainty. But as I mentioned, we've been part of the process to develop these regulations. We've actually developed a guide on how to implement DPR in the state of California. We did that with the National Water Research Institute. So we feel pretty good about what that means. Number 3, there are other water reuse issues, and some of it's going to be speculative. So for example, many of us have heard about the Hertzberg bill, the concept of how much water recycling must utilities do. That's up in the air. There are utilities that are doing moving towards 100% water recycling, like the city of LA. But there's other large utilities that simply can't recycle that much of their water for different reasons. And there's also future water conservation credits. So the goal here is if you implement potable reuse or direct potable reuse, then that allows you to get credit for that when you're looking at your overall per capita water use. Fourth item, task 1, collaboration meetings. And these are really important, of course. You're working with regional partners potentially. So we're going to be out there talking with Carpinteria and Santa Barbara to look at regional solutions. And I'll point out that if one or both of those options doesn't pan out early on, that the discussions say that there's no good collaboration that people want no joint project that people want to move forward with, then our scope items will be cut accordingly. We have broken down our scope and budget so that we can take out Carpinteria, take out Santa Barbara, and move ahead with the rest of the project. And then the last item, we do have internal meetings. We actually have an entire section, a scope on management and project management. And so, but there's meetings in task 1, and there's also general meetings. We want to maintain a cohesive approach, working with both districts. Right, task 2. It's called wastewater treatment plant alternative analysis. 3 major items shown here, and I'll talk through each of them. At the top, starting with wastewater treatment plant and looking at flows and MPDES permit analysis. So if you do purified water, you're going to make RO concentrate, and that RO concentrate is going to change the concentrations and the flows in your ocean outfall. So we've got to look closely at if that impacts both permit conditions and the ability to push water out. So essentially, you've got to have a minimum velocity of some kind driving that water out for disposal. So we're going to be looking at that. Item number 2, assuming that Carpinteria and or Santa Barbara are interested in further participating in this study, at least, right? That they want to be part of the conversation, then we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at both the Carp and Santa Barbara wastewater plants and understanding their capacity. Can they handle additional flows from Montecito? The third item is a detailed MSD wastewater treatment plant analysis. This is the mini master plan. This is going to look at your entire wastewater plant, and it's going to say what's working well, what isn't, what needs repair, what still has life in it, what does it cost to upgrade everything to a 2021 standard, and if you wanted to fully replace the plant with the latest technology, what would that cost as well? And then we'd also look at oil and grease treatment. So oil and grease treatment is only necessary for recycled water. It is not necessary for MSD's MPDES or effluent permit But for recycled water, because we have to do desalting, because we have to use reverse osmosis, we need to remove the oil and grease. So we're going to look at that. And it's several different ways to do it. And neither of them are cheap. And we will look at then further treatment for non-potable and potable water reuse. Okay, Rob, you're on the spot.
Okay. So, so task 3 is really the infrastructure outside of wastewater plant, and how to deliver various kinds of water across the alternatives. And for the most part, it's built upon the work that was done in the 2018 Recycle Water Facilities Plan, with demands and unit costs and detailed information like that being updated. But for the most part, the alignments and primary assumptions will remain the same. So for the non-potable reuse customer infrastructure update, that's the large going to the golf courses. So we would do, as I mentioned, update the demands, update based on that the flows required, and also look from the water district side, pricing and potential cost recovery. And this, since so much work's been done on this already, this is really to make sure we're having all of these alternatives at a similar level of detail, so they can be compared across each other. The second one here, the Carpinteria project. So that's looking at delivering different kinds of flow that Andy mentioned, raw wastewater, or purified water, to Carpinteria. And depending on the type of flow or the type of water would be where it's going. And then also the initial meetings with Carpinteria will likely narrow the scope and assumptions of this alternative. We'll also consider the potential impacts of adding Summerlin Sanitary District's flow, since we'll be going pretty close to their plants along the way, but we're not doing a full evaluation of Summerlin's flows. And then key thing for the water district is how you get the supply benefit, whether it's direct delivery of that water back from Carpinteria, or whether there's some kind of exchange of the shared supplies, like from Kachuma.
Hey, Rob,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This Woody Barrett here. Quick question for you or Andy. So 2 years ago, the former GM of the sanitary district told us there was a law in effect in California, and maybe one of you two can shed some light on it or don't know anything about it, that if recycled water was available near a golf course or a cemetery, they had to buy it. Is that true or untrue?
I have not heard that one.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what we were told. We were told that 10 to 12 times. But
Yeah.
I never investigated. I never heard the law. I don't know the statute and any of that. It just comes up as more of a curiosity than anything.
I think it would be good to get a legal opinion on that. I think that's derived from waste and unreasonable use water. And there is, you can say that after tying it back to certain things, but it's got to be cost effective for the customer. There's certain things tied to that. It's not just that you have to take it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, ours is more complicated for the golf courses because both of them have their own water wells.
Exactly.
So that's
Exactly.
a portion of the, potable system from the water district. They're not even buying water from them.
Exactly. And many other
So
places
that would be taken out of the equation, I guess, when you're, calculating all of this.
So that makes it more complicated.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know if you'd ever heard that law or ever run across it. We are not looking. We're not looking to get aggressive with anyone. It was more of a curiosity because we were told that so many times, and I just never had time to investigate it.
Many districts have mandatory use ordinances, which require a customer to use recycled water if it's within a certain distance and it's economical. And so those are pretty common. But again, it's a little more complicated with the fact that the golf courses don't use all of their water from the water district.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt your flow there.
I
No
have a
problem.
quick
When I
question.
see Director Johnson, yes,
Yeah,
President Johnson.
hi, hi, I have a quick question. So welcome and thank you all. I do have a question. You had mentioned about the golf courses flow and the price that you've done some work so far. So which areas have you done so far as the golf courses? I just heard, I think it was Rob that you just mentioned that.
Yeah. So, so the 2018 Recycle Water Facilities Plan looked at all the potential uses in the area, and the two golf courses were the two largest, and the
Which ones are they?
estimates. It is.
Burnham Wood and Valley Club.
Thank you, Burnham Wood and Valley
Okay.
Club.
Okay.
And yeah, and so we estimated their demand based on the water use from the water district, the estimated pumping, and their irrigated acreage. And but at the time we didn't have direct communication, so we didn't have a full confirmation. And so we're hoping to have some follow-up discussions on that, on the demands.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I just mentioned the Carpinteria project, and Montecito alternatives beyond the non-potable alternatives is the different potable reuse versions that Andy mentioned. And so again, we did a high-level look at this in the Recycle Water Facility Plan in 2018, but the regulations weren't out, and so the main updates from that are really going to be in task 2 of the treatment requirements. And as well as looking at some of the Bella Vista water treatment plant, the water treatment plant requirements that are in the regs. But we will be using the basic infrastructure that we used in the previous plan. And then the last one is Santa Barbara, sending raw water or secondary water to the Santa Barbara wastewater plant, the water reclamation plant. And we didn't look at this in detail in the 2018 report, and so so this will take a little bit of additional work compared to the other ones of looking at how we would actually get the raw wastewater or secondary treated water to Santa Barbara. There is some existing lines, but they probably aren't sized properly, and luckily your new GM has some good knowledge, and we've also done some previous work on the collection system. So we're not starting from scratch, but I just wanted to note that it's a slightly higher level of effort compared to some of the other items. And so that's it for task 3.
Great.
Quick question here. And then Brad, you chime in if you know, since you used to work there. But I've heard rumors that the city of Santa Barbara doesn't need any more recycled water because they have a saturated market. They've done every single park, every single golf course, every single commercial facility that they can. There's nowhere to go with recycled water if they had more. Does anybody know if that's correct?
Director Barrett, I don't know exactly all the details that are that go into their demands, but I will tell you that from my involvement on the recycled water side, the city of Santa Barbara has extended their system out to pretty much all potential users for the most part. I mean, 95% of them. And that recycled water we're talking about is the non-potable reuse version of recycled water. So the plan that Rob is, describing here, the city's future enhancements of the recycled water, where it might be going to reuse for direct potable or indirect potable on their plan, that would change their entire customer, base. It would go to residences and all kinds of other uses that right now is just not there. But you're correct. I believe they've extended the system out to all users that essentially have expressed interest in it and can use that water as it currently exists. So.
Yeah, and I just finished their enhanced urban water management plan, and they sell about roughly 1,000 acre feet of non-potable water right now, or use about 1,000 acre feet of non-potable water, and there's 100, 200, maybe 300 acre feet they might expand to. But beyond that, it's the focus is when we're talking about this is as Brad mentioned is potable reuse.
Do you mean 1,000 acre feet per year?
1,000 acre feet per year. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll just go on to task 4. Like I said, there will be a number of meetings and discussions throughout the project, but we are going to then move towards these workshops for decision making. And we've scheduled 5 workshops, and that is to work with staff, committees, board members, and go through and rank and evaluate the preferred alternatives together. And then we will be compiling. So essentially each of these tasks are going to have summary technical memorandums. And what we will do then is use the workshop process, get some conclusions on best future path, and then summarize things in really an executive summary document. So there's not going to be a monster report. There's going to be a nice executive summary. And then there'll be these prior work efforts that have been that will be referenced. We then have an optional task that's in our scope and budget, and it is membrane demonstration support. So MSD, of course, as you know, has that pilot on site. And there is line items for us to potentially help support that pilot effort. And I just want to take a moment and talk through a few items there. So why would that be useful? We'll start with that. The concepts of oil and grease removal with conventional technologies like dissolved air flotation or membrane bioreactors, those are going to be costly, and we will be evaluating and costing those out. There is a potential, and I want to make sure we use that and understand that word, and potential. It's not proven yet. That oil and grease can be removed through a simple pH adjustment step and using some bag filters and things that are already on site on the pilot. And if that is proven to be successful over the long term, if the membranes work well under those operational conditions, then there are some substantial cost savings that could be had to remove oil and grease. And thus it makes the recycled water project, whether it's non-potable or purified, be less expensive. So there's opportunities there. I'm not promising anything, but it does look very intriguing. So our support would be to provide weekly meetings, 1 hour, with operations staff to review the prior week's work, to look ahead to the future. This would include myself. Of course, I'm down in Ventura, so I'm not far. But it would also include one of my membrane chief technologist types who's very, very savvy with membrane systems, pilot and full scale. And we are familiar with your operation. We have been talking to operations staff frequently about that pilot and trying to help provide some early support.
Quick, Andy?
Yep.
Quick question. So any idea what the source of oil and grease is for our district, since we don't have, industrial or 50 restaurants here?
Sure, right. And I'll start, but Carrie's thought a lot about this. So, right, it looks like it's coming from the home, because during COVID, what Carrie has said is that it didn't really get better. Like if it was all coming from restaurants, from bake shops. So, for example, there's a little town in the mountains over San Diego where all the pie shops create huge oil and grease problems at the head of their small little wastewater plant. That may not be the case here. It may just be the home cooker that's putting a little too much oil on their food. And the oil and grease, the challenge is, and this was noted in the last master plan in the early 2000s, the challenge is that your wastewater plant does remove oil and grease, but it's not designed to do it. It doesn't have the primary treatment step that would really do a good job of removing oil and grease. It doesn't have to, because you don't need it to meet your MPDES permit, but it's a combination of things. You do appear to have some fluctuating oil and grease numbers that are coming through. The treatment plant removes it most of the time, but not all the time. And when it comes through at 2, 3, 5 milligrams per liter, that could be problematic for membrane systems. And that's where the pilot could come in play to potentially help with that. Now, I went a little too long there. I don't know if Carrie, if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I think Andy, you did a good summary. And remember that our commercial properties, they have oil and grease separators and whatnot, and they're pumped out by those various companies. And so we have a good handle on, you know, when those are being pumped out and whatnot. It's really the homes that's during COVID, we did see an increase in our oil and grease levels. That like Andy said, it doesn't make an impact on our secondary process or our MPDS permit, but it did have a very big impact on our pilot project and the membranes.
That says loads about our community and what they eat. I thought we were pretty healthy in our consumption of things. I guess not.
Well, I'll tell you, my cholesterol went up over COVID. So I'm working it back down now.
Here's another question. So say we fast forward, you guys do the feasibility study, everything looks great. I'm just picking this out of the air. Carpinteria says, hey, we'll take your, effluent, either treated or not treated, and, we're going to inject it into the basin. And they take a look and they take another hard look, go, wait a minute, you got lots of oil and grease. We don't want that. So is there that possibility?
So I think that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. And I think, though, that what we would do, just to make everyone comfortable, Carrie and her team are generating a database of your oil and grease concentrations in both the raw wastewater and the secondary effluent. We'd go down to Carp or for you down, for me up, and grab a couple samples just to understand, are we like this or are we about the same? I think that's an interesting point, just to make sure that there isn't an issue there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think about the blending of the, effluents or, processed, product or whatever it might be. Their system's designed for X, which you know way more about than I do. And then they bring in ours and they go like, wait a minute, this throws everything a kilter here. And maybe we have to do some type of treatment here and spend the money to try to reduce oil and grease, I guess.
Director Barrett, I would like to add to that any plan that we go down the road of, these conversations are going to have to be had at that time as well, because the same limits that Andy just explained for us, Carpinteria conceivably would have very similar issues with their oil and grease, because the source of the oil and grease, if it's coming from homes, they also have home oil and grease discharges. So for the scenario you just outlined for us, it might be we need to participate in their oil and grease project and upsize their system to handle our capacity. So that wouldn't come until a future kind of analysis in my eyes. Andy and Rob have provided this to us just so that we kind of have a big picture on what we are aware of already, just from our limited pilot project study, and what we do know are going to be some limitations currently within our district.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Then Carpinteria may eat salad at every meal. We don't know. They may be way healthier than us. Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
So I don't know if you have other questions. Oh, sorry, Director Johnson, you're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry. Is that their presentation?
That's it.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob and Andy. I do have a quick question. Have you come up with the timeline? I guess there's 4 phases of this particular project that you're looking at.
Yeah, we'd like to have 12 months to move this forward. We could potentially cram it into 9, but with 2 different agencies, I've worked on multiple agency projects a number of times, and with 2 different agencies, it just takes time to move things through, gain consensus, work out differences. So 12 months would really be a more comfortable timeframe.
So we're talking about of July of next year. Is that what we're talking about, 2022?
Yeah, assuming we were to get started this month, yes.
Okay. And are the different phases, the timeline, is there a way that we could actually get a timeline from you, of a little bit more concrete timeline? Is that okay?
Yeah, and I apologize. I can try to dig up. I know that my design manager, his name is Vincent Rocabert, and Vincent is not on the call today, but I believe we do have a detailed schedule, and we'd be happy to pass that through.
That'd be great. Thank you, Andy. I think the timeline is really important to look at for our board. And then also, have you, I guess there's some additional questions about the cost. Have you discussed anything about the cost yet?
We have not. So I mean, we've discussed it internally. We've discussed it with your engineering staff, but obviously I didn't have any slides on it today. I do have a slide that has our total level of effort, which is the hours, and that's readily, of course, converted into the total cost number. Should I bring that up?
Yes, and also too, it would be nice to see what the breakdown of the different phases are as far as the costs.
Yep.
It would help us kind of look at the overall picture as well.
Sure.
And Andy, before you jump into that, I just want to follow up one thing on the schedule. When we were talking about it previously, is the scheduling, the collaboration meetings with Carpinteria and Santa Barbara are very important to get going early on, and then scheduling the coordination meetings and the presentations to sanitation district, whether it's a committee or board, and same with water district committee or board. Again, those lighting all those up and it takes time, and so that'll be an important part of the schedule.
Yes, and I guess what it is important for our board of directors to have more of a really total cost, the breakdown of the costs of the different phases. That'd be really helpful for our board of directors, because they were going to be making the final decisions. Okay.
Sure.
So, yeah, thank you for that. Okay.
Okay. Would you like me to go through the slide I have on the screen, or do you want me to
please.
follow up later? Okay.
No, go ahead, Andy. I would appreciate that.
Quick question, Andy. And then we'll go with your slide here and description you're talking about in detail. You've worked at multiple districts, multiple states all around on these recycle projects, correct?
Yep.
Rural engineers. And I'm picking the state of California. In the state of California, how have you seen it progress when you have a separate water district, sanitary district? Does a water district take the helm since they can sell the recycled water and recoup the money for the machine and infrastructure and distribution? Or does a sanitary district, do the two districts combine efforts? I mean, what have you seen? What's the largest percentage of what you've seen?
Sure. So yeah, and I've seen it where the wastewater utility drives the issues, but that is less common. And let me just start with that though, to explain why it is. So when a wastewater utility is driving a recycled water project, it's because they have an effluent discharge issue. They can't discharge to a certain location as much, or for example, there's constituents in their water that maybe like not nutrients that they don't want going into a water body. And so, but you can recycle that and those nutrients are really great. So then you'll have a wastewater utility driving that because they're discharge limited. There may be other examples, but that's the one that I'm used to seeing where the wastewater utility drives it. The water utility, for the large majority of projects, is the one that drives it because they need extra water. They want to do water reuse. But there is a split between responsibilities and funding these projects. And it takes some effort to sort out exactly which utility benefits from which aspects of the scope of work, and working through those financial agreements. But I just would reinforce that it is important for both utilities to have a seat at the table, because these things that are going to be done, the impacts will be at the wastewater plant. The operations are often wastewater operators. The famous Orange County Water District groundwater replenishment system was staffed with wastewater operators. So there's a need for both, but breaking it down does take some time and negotiations between the water and wastewater utility.
Yeah, in a previous conversation, I think you gentlemen gave a presentation possibly to the two districts combined. I can't remember. But you said you'd seen instances, not many, but you've seen instances where the water district takes the helm. They do the machine. Essentially, the sanitary district provides some, area for the machine to be placed, and of course the effluent. And then in some instances, even the water district mans the equipment, or operates equipment. Doesn't, it could be a man or a woman, but you've seen that occur also. I mean, I just take a look at Goleta. Every district I looked at, it seems like the water district pretty much takes the helm on these things. And it may be, like you said, because they need water. So they're, water driven. But, Goleta and them, they worked out to where the sanitary district, operates the equipment, but it's owned, and every drop that comes out, it is owned by the water district.
Right.
So their only job in Goleta is to keep that 3 million gallon below ground tank full of recycled water for, purple pipe use, irrigation. And it's worked beautifully with that arrangement with them. But I don't know, other than that, I don't know what the sanitary district paid for initially. In a feasibility study, when you keep referring to 2018, you're talking about the Woodard and Kern study, I guess, that the water district did, which was a look at 27 different ways to essentially recycle water within our community. The feasibility study, is what your task now is to fine tune that to see what is feasible and what is not, and possibly get closer to ground, as you say, instead of a 30,000 foot view of it. Find out how much it's going to cost, and at the end of the day, what does the recycled water, how expensive is it? Is that what the feasibility study does, or is it being done so that we could qualify for grants if they're available, that sort of thing? Do you have to have a feasibility study in order to get a grant?
Right. These are good questions. I'd start, and let me see if Brad wants to jump in here real quick, and then I maybe have Rob. Is there something you want to say, Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Randy. So to your first point, Director Barrett, is, the coming on board in the last month or so, I've looked at this as a great opportunity to evaluate all the options that are out there. There might be partnerships that really could not only help develop a reliable water source for Montecito, whether it's a partnership with a neighboring agency or here at the district, but it also could make us more competitive for grants if we do end up with a partnership that's a stronger team fighting for money to ultimately go to the state level, go to a regional level, and ask for grants, loans, whatever it is, and potentially ultimately lower the cost for all involved. From an economies of scale standpoint, it may not necessarily end up that way, but I think coming on board and learning about what Andy and Rob have been working on with my staff as well as the water district staff, this is a great effort of work in order for us to really make sure that we're looking at all options before going down the road and spending a lot of money and going, well, did we ever look at this other option over here? So this is kind of, in my eyes, a step back a little bit, but it's, I think, going to make everybody feel a lot more comfortable as we walk through this, that we are looking at all options, and that whatever we get at the end of the day is supported by both water and sanitary districts, as well as any neighboring districts if we end up, or agencies if we end up partnering with them. And we'll feel better in a few years from now that we did analyze all the options available. We also hopefully will end up with less surprises down the road. And I think that's a big part of this phased approach that, and I was going to mention to Director Johnson's comment earlier, we don't have a slide in here as far as, sequencing of the work. Andy and Rob can work with us and the water district on developing a better graphic for that. But the sequence of work here and the hours that you see in front of you on the screen are really the entirety of the contract. One of the things I wanted to make sure is clear is that, and why Rob mentioned it earlier, it's really important to get those stakeholder meetings up front and early in the process so that we understand what is the likelihood that we will need to continue exploring an option with Carpinteria or Santa Barbara. We may find a fatal flaw early on in the process, and all those hours that have been dedicated to that other agency or even our internal agency, those may go away. So this contract that the hours you see and the level of effort you see in front of you is kind of all inclusive to get us to the end of the day. We may still have to investigate all 4 options to 100%. But if we get to a certain point where one of them doesn't make sense anymore, we would cease to continue exploring that option. We would document that on why we're no longer going to explore it. Whether it's, one of the agencies says we have to do, the sanitary district cannot transmit water to us for whatever reason, then that would end that analysis. And so therefore all that cost that would be going into our team's work, we would no longer have that anymore. So I want to make sure that's a big part of this phased approach. It's not just about a normal order of a project. It's about eliminating options if there's a reason to. So I wanted to caveat that because these hours may look astonishing, but it's because it's the entirety of the project if we go forth and fully explore all 4 options that Andy and Rob have put forth today.
Thanks, Brad. That really covered most of the questions there from Director Barrett. Let me just see if there's a couple more items there. So just for perspective, when the prior work was done, and Rob can talk on that, when he was at Woodard and Curran, there was a lot less clarity on what direct potable reuse would require. And I'll say that, my team that I oversee at Carollo, we are doing detailed evaluations for direct potable reuse in the state of California and design of direct potable reuse outside of it. And so some of that knowledge is going to be certainly updating and better informing some of the DPR discussions. But Rob, is there other things that this analysis is going to do compared to what you were part of before and when you were at a different company?
Yeah, I mean, it's one other new aspect for the water district is the potential conservation credits that direct potable reuse would provide, and that's new since the last study was prepared, and it's actually being negotiated at the state level right now, and will be announced by the end of the year. And so that helps the water district comply with water conservation requirements from the state. And I think what I've heard is really just wanting to be able to make a decision on which way to go forward, and wanting to have the last study. There was lots of follow-on efforts that were recommended to clarify some decisions, and some of those have been implemented, and now we've got more information, and now we've got the potable reuse guidelines. And so let's take this effort now and identify what's the best path forward for recycled water for the community.
Thank you. And oil and grease. That's
Yes.
that's a new item, which frankly causes not a complete rethink, but a pretty large change in some of the engineering efforts needed. Because again, I'll just say it, oil and grease, it fouls membrane systems, and that means you either can't produce water, or you produce it at a much lower rate, which means that you have to have more equipment costs, more operational costs. So,
Yeah, I guess what everybody's, and we've discussed this before, I'm sorry to be redundant, but the law gets passed in 2023 for direct potable reuse. Your feasibility study says best deal is to go to Carpinteria. I'm just picking that out of the air of the 4 alternatives that we have. And we're gearing up to do that. What I've been told is, talked it over with staff, Carrie and some others last year. If we said go, if we had all the money in place, grants, whatever, and said, let's recycle everything, our 560,000 gallons a day, go. It would be 3 years before one drop comes out from that machine. So I guess I am concerned that we pick an avenue to go on this feasibility study, which is a great thing to do. Don't get me wrong. Everybody wants recycled water. The sanitary district wants to help 100%. And then DPR passes in 2023 and we go like, oh, geez, we just need to recycle our own water and re-inject it up there at Bella Vista into the, potable water system. That changes everything. That changes the whole focus of what this feasibility study may come up with, that sort of thing. I mean, do you have any worries about something like that occurring?
Yeah, so good points. So I again, I don't want to be overly confident here, but there are massive utilities in the state of California that are moving forward with direct potable reuse projects. 250 million gallons a day type projects where a large amount of that water would be for direct potable. And so first of all, there's going to be a lot of pressure to get those regulations done. There are large scale pilot projects where people are building 1 million gallon a day demonstration systems to show what the future looks like for them for indirect and direct potable reuse. This, I've had, frankly, direct conversations one-on-one with our governor, and he's in full support of direct potable reuse and has pushed his staff to make these projects happen. So I guess you put that all together, and my approach as your project manager is direct potable reuse will be here. And by the time it takes you to do the basis, so this is a pretty detailed planning study, but then you follow that with the basis of design report, which falls into pre-design, design, construction. There will be certainty on these DPR questions before you even need to have certainty. And so, so my approach would be that this is happening, and we're not going to undercut DPR options in this study by saying, well, I don't know, it may not happen. It's going to happen in the state. It's just a decision of does it happen, on the central coast of California, or does it happen in the Los Angeles basin, or does it happen up north, from us here? So
if they're doing 1 million gallon day pilot test machines, I just want to put our district's, water and sanitary here in Montecito. We want to put our card in the hat that they're thinking obviously of a much larger system. And we'd like to buy that 1 million gallon a day pilot system, the DPR, once they're finished with it.
There you go.
Because they're not going to need it.
That's right.
Barrick, just to add to what Andy just said, not only may it happen in other regions, there is some form of thought happening across this region, though. The city of Santa Barbara is forward thinking in this, as Andy and Rob are both well aware of that, the work that's going on with the city. Carpinteria, same thing. Rob and his team at WSC are also working with Carpinteria, and so they're in touch with them. So we are fortunate enough that we are sandwiched between two very forward-thinking agencies, and I'm very happy about that, because that means we have some leaders around us, and we have people like Andy and Rob who are in touch at the more regional and state level. And so I'm very confident that something will not slip through the cracks that we do not hear about from one of these different angles. And I feel like we're at a good point right now. We're planning for the future. This feasibility study really establishes a good foundation. And I'm glad Andy brought up the next phases after this. This is just a feasibility planning level study in order for us to evaluate the options. We have time. There will be time between now and the first drop of direct or indirect potable reuse water that comes out of any facility, whether it's ours or one of our neighboring agencies. It just is a matter of how much time. And so some of the items of work, like the pilot study, I wanted to make sure, we understand that if we decide down the road that we want to elect for using that optional line that Andy had highlighted, that's not just turn on the pilot study for a month and get data. In fact, Andy was educating me on these usually run in 45-day kind of cycles or windows. And so in order to get data out of that, that pilot plant that we have here, we would need to run it for a few of those cycles in order to be able to get consistent data and also be able to test some of these variables that Andy was alluding to with the oil and grease. And that oil and grease pilot plant helps us here. Some of the data will help us with being able to discuss with other neighboring agencies. But by and large, I think the data that we get from that would really help us hone in whatever future we have for a pilot plant here and help us tackle that oil and grease problem. So it's something that I'm supportive of when the time is right. And that, again, Director Barrett, might be something that we discuss with the water district on how costs are covered for that element of the work. But I'm a proponent for it getting done. It's just a matter of who covers the cost. That's something for later down the road.
No, I'm not against that at all. It's just that, in previous discussions with Andy, and I'm sure Rob was there also, that this pulse technology, which is what our pilot machine is not the machine that we're going, our districts are going to use. That the technology is just not there yet. Is that correct, Andy?
Yeah, and I want to clarify something, because that is what I said, paraphrased. So what I want to clarify is that the membranes, the pressure vessels, the components, those are all the same as you would install with a conventional system like Orange County, et cetera. The difference is how that system's operated, how it's valved, and there's how the mechanical aspects of it run. So as it and why did I say that this isn't the right application for the first installation of that? It's because it's the first municipal. It would be the first municipal installation of that technology, and my view is that it's always better to be the second or the third installation of a new technology than the first, because things do go wrong. But the pilot itself will tell us everything we want to know about water quality, and it'll tell us everything we want to know about fouling due to oil and grease. So it can be used. We would learn almost the same thing as if you had a conventional RO system on site, is my point.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarity. Perfect.
Yep. So I don't want to belabor the point. This meeting is for all of you. I do have a slide up with the hours, and I was going to search for my budget numbers, and I texted Rob and he sent it to me. So, our proposed total budget is $420,000, which is a lot. I realize that. And we've done our best to trim it down just so everyone understands our rates and things are based upon, not on the latest 2021 or 2022 budgets. So we're trying to keep our hours down. We're trying to keep our costs down the best we can. We have broken down the hours so you can see them on this spreadsheet and on this slide. And I just want to walk through them just briefly. The largest hours are on task 2, which is almost 900 hours. And more than half of that is the mini master plan, which would be the effort focused entirely on your wastewater plant, which is something that I think it probably should be done anyways. The last master plan was done in the early 2000s. So we're coming up on 20 years. And so there's a lot of hours there. And then there's a lot of hours in the infrastructure because you don't want to just lay down a ruler on a map. You've got to look at, can I really run pipe along the freeway? What are my challenges for right of way? And so there's a lot of infrastructure analysis that Rob's team would be doing under task 3 with a little bit of support from us. And then the next largest task is task 4, which is the workshops. And again, these could be cut, but the challenge on cutting workshop time is that you're not sufficiently hearing everybody or addressing everyone's concerns. And I just want to point out again, interagency joint projects take a lot of time to gain consensus and work through concerns that different folks have. So those are the big ones. The membrane operational support is essentially just my membrane technologist once a week, preparing for and getting on a phone call with operations staff. So that's not a large one. And I don't know if there's anything else I can really say about this, but I'm happy to answer other questions.
So Andy, I had one question earlier. Why do you do a feasibility study?
Right. Well, so especially in today's environment, you want cost confidence. Yeah, and you want a clear picture of the challenges and the benefits of each project. So, for example, we could have I've been doing water reuse for 24 years. And I could certainly look at these options and say, I think a third of them are just not going to work out. But the thing is that I have to convince all of you of that. And if I just come in, and sling some answers at you, if you knew me for my whole life, you'd trust it and you'd say, okay, sure, Andy, but you don't. And your ratepayers also have to know that people have looked at things. So that's actually more important than me and any kind of trust in me, is that I've sat in these meetings where the final idea has been brought forward and someone will get up and they'll say, hey, my cousin down the road had this idea and gosh, it sure sounds awesome. And it's a third of the price that this engineer just said. Well, what we want to do is we want to look at all those ideas and we want to document that, in fact, you know what, this is too expensive. This one doesn't provide enough water. This one has reliability concerns. And so you can honestly go to them and say, look, we've looked at a number of reasonable alternatives and 80% of them just don't make it.
Thank you, Andy, for your presentation again. I know that we'll go back to 2018 because there was a feasibility study that was done. So part of that feasibility study, you did receive a grant. Can you tell me how much that was?
Yeah, Rob.
It was.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, 50% of the cost. It was $75,000 of the $150,000 study.
Okay, so you're correct. From what I've just been reading, I don't know about that one, but the maximum grant amount established by the State Water Board in the Clear Water State. So you're working with getting possibly grant from this the State Water Board that is going to give the grants. Is that correct? Or
Well, we haven't been pursuing a grant for this effort. That was with the State Water Resources Control Board and in the Recycle Water Funding Program, and that study is actually a prerequisite to get a state revolving fund, a low interest loan from the state.
okay.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, okay. So it'd be just helpful just to really look at that because there is grants. I know the governor is actually putting an X amount of dollars more into infrastructures, even the president on the infrastructures, which is help us because we have to look at our infrastructure and our old equipment. I guess the grant maximum has been 150,000, but now they're going to actually up that. So they're willing to look at possibly 50%, possibly the total cost, and that could pay for a big chunk of what we're talking about. And they want to have, and these are for feasibility studies. So it's not just, the construction part of it. So this is something that could be really positive for our special districts. Okay, so that would be really
Johnson, to that point on the grants, I want to make it clear that, my staff and I are prepared to work with the water district on looking for those grants and applying for those grants. I want to be cautious on adding any scope of work to Andy and Rob's proposal here, because anytime we ask our consultants to do work, they're going to need to account for it somewhere. So we're up at 1,800 hours already. So I did want to explain a little bit about how we got here too. We kind of didn't get there. Andy and Rob and my engineering team, as well as the water district, have been working together long before I got here to pull together this scope of services and a proposal. And I think we're on version 5 or 6 by now. And this is the one that we feel is ready for both our sanitary district, strategic committee, as well as the water districts. And so this is the one that we'll be discussing at next week's joint committee meeting. And we've gone through it because the initial cut that I saw was still even higher than this. And so Andy and Rob and our water district and sanitary district teams have looked at this. We've tried cutting from some scope where we felt like might have been a little extra. We've also thrown in our own internal resources in order to lower the cost of the consultant services. So Carrie and I are prepared to help with some of the work here at Montecito Sanitary to help lower that cost. But at this point, this level of effort that you're seeing in front of you is about the best as far as the lowest number of hours that we can get to without drastically changing what the consultant services are going to be. Andy and Rob are hopefully going to give us that foundation of the project so that by the time we get to that top of that structure, I'm sorry for the civil engineering analogy, but when we get to the top, it's a sound structure. We don't have that example of what Andy gave us earlier about somebody coming in and say, well, did you look at this other alternative? I feel like this is a very strong proposal. It's got the right team members involved with Andy's experience with the city and at the state level, Rob's experience working with Carpinteria. So I'd like to reserve any additional scope of work unless the joint committee next week adds to it. I'd like to kind of hold any scope of work until and put it back on my team here. So the grant funding research, I'm sure Rob and Andy will definitely notify us if they hear anything, but my team will probably do most of the research on the grant funding on that.
Great. No, that's definitely appreciated. Because I was just kind of curious on the last grant, was that done by the consultants or was that brought up? They found the grant through the Montecito Water District. That was kind of curious to find out because the last grant, I believe, was provided by.
I think the water district. I think the water district paid a consultant to do the grant application. They also got a second grant as a follow-on when they looked at groundwater recharge in the golf course areas. And so if it was through the same program with the 50% match, I think Brad and his team would need to reach out to the state board to see if Montecito would be eligible for a third grant. And otherwise, I think the scope may line up with it. It also typically takes 3 to 6 months to prepare the application, submit it, process before you can get started. So there's also a schedule component to getting a grant like that.
Thank you, Rob.
And I'll just add, we will follow up. I know Rob, I haven't myself personally done a lot of grant work, but my company has, and I know Rob has personally done grant work. So we'll do a quick follow-up summary for engineering staff on things that could be potentially pursued and where some challenges are.
Okay, thank you so much.
Got 2 questions, Andy or Rob. So what are your thoughts? First question is, what are your thoughts on the 2018 Woodard and Kern study? Even though it's from a high altitude view, what did you guys think about it?
Rob, why don't you go ahead since you were, and I can comment, but you go ahead.
I think what we found, so I was the primary author for that. What we found was there's 3 or 4 things that were key assumptions that we couldn't make great assumptions on with the information we had. So it was tough to make a strong recommendation coming out of it. And one of them was with the groundwater basin and what it could hold, and if they could do a indirect potable reuse project with it. And so that was the purpose of the follow-on study, which actually determined it would not be feasible under the current regulations. There's also some questions on the sanitation district's outfall and minimum flows. And so that the sanitation district has done some subsequent work on that we'll be able to incorporate. And then there are some questions on the golf courses and then on potable customers, working with them to better understand demands. And the water district's done some work on that. So there's been follow-on work that occurred since then to refine the alternatives. And I think we mentioned this earlier, but the biggest was we made some assumptions for potable reuse just based on what we knew in 2016, 2017 when we were preparing it. Pretty preliminary information. And so I think now we've got much better information to get better cost estimates for what these potable reuse type projects will require. And so my hope is that with this new information, we've got less unknowns coming out of this. And so we've got a better basis to make a recommendation to move forward with.
Well, for me, myself, I mean, I compare this feasibility study, which is fine tuning, compared to the Woodard and Kern. Woodard and Kern study I thought was excellent, in my mind. $150,000 for that amount of work, 27 alternatives for recycled in, our community was, I thought, outstanding, along with all the different diagrams and plats and all the work. That was a ton of work put into that. The main thing it did for me was essentially it came down to eliminating 22, 23 of those ideas. They just won't work. So you fine tune it down to, are these 4 that you guys are looking at with this feasibility study, are those derived from that Woodard and Kern general overview? Are any of these new? Or these are all coming from that study more or less to fine tune?
I don't have it. I think I'll double check, but the sending Montecito's wastewater to Santa Barbara was not considered in that at that time. I think partially because Santa Barbara's potable reuse plans weren't as developed. They're being developed in parallel actually at the time.
Well, in defense of the Woodard Kern, it was looking at using the recycled water here
Right.
in our
Oh,
community
that's right.
and
That's
not
right.
sending it to Santa Barbara. So
Yeah.
that may not have been covered, although
Yeah.
it is an alternative with, this feasibility plan. So, but I myself, I enjoyed reading. I loved all the presentations. I thought it was great. So kudos to all the people that
Thank you.
worked on it.
So we've got a high bar. Then it sounds like, so I'm not gonna. Obviously I have a lot of respect for Rob and the work that he's done. So I was kind of teasing when I said I was going to comment on it. But I would say that the one thing that we're bringing to this, and he's not here today, and he could have been. I just thought that I could cover it for him. Is Vincent Roquebert is my. He's my design manager, and we're not doing design, we're doing planning. But Vincent has been overseeing the large design and design build for potable water reuse for the city of LA for the last 5 years. And I've worked with him on design build and constructing these facilities. And so what Vincent's going to bring and what we'll bring through Vincent is a really clear understanding of these construction costs to implement and the challenges. So when we were working through the scope and budget with him over the last however many months, he kept coming back with, well, I need more information on some obscure thing. And it's because he's seen things go sideways cost-wise because of construction issues. So that is, I think, one thing that we're bringing here is a seasoned veteran engineer who has implemented from design to design build to construction these projects.
Andy and Rob, I don't mean to knock you out of 1,870 hours to knock it down 400 hours, but I think you said there are 4 areas you're looking at in your previous slides for this feasibility study. In your mind, are any of those 4 just not going to work? You already know it before you start.
So that's where the initial. I'm skeptical that.
I'll take skeptical.
Yeah. I'm skeptical that the small community, for example, of Carpinteria, is going to have either the capacity or the desire to take raw wastewater from this community, as one example. If we send them secondary effluent, okay. I think that the transmission, I do talk to, so my son's an engineering student at Boulder, and I tell him, even though he knows I'm a treatment guy, I say, look, it's more expensive to move water than it is to treat water. Yeah. And so you're moving water a long distance down there. So whether it is the lack of capacity, lack of desire, or the infrastructure costs to move water that distance, I have a hunch that any carpentry option was probably going to fall off the table, because
Wow.
it'll be cheaper to do DPR either through a Santa Barbara connection or through your own project. But again, without doing the analysis, we can't throw that out. My gut feeling isn't enough to put a safety factor on. So
Don't forget, we're going to get 100,000 gallons from Summerlin. Come on, Andy.
yeah, right. And that adds that, and in some ways, hey, let's more water. But the more water you add on, the more complexity you add to a project.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about connections in the pipeline out there.
Yeah.
And Director Barrett, Andy and Rob are our experts. We're bringing them in to help with this. And so I agree with what Andy's shared. Some of those are some of the same, what I call challenges. I'm not ruling out any options, that I'm trying to keep an open mind here, but I do see exactly those challenges. And so one of them might be to convince another organization that they should treat our wastewater, and there's some benefit there for them. The other challenge is overcoming the cost of doing such a thing like that, like moving water from one agency to another. And so that's exactly why those stakeholder engagements and initial workshops are so critical, is to ask the right questions. I've only briefly looked at the Woodard and Kern report, and it did a great job of high level studying the opportunities, but some of the questions still exist. We haven't asked all the right questions yet. And like Rob explained, some of the materials that support this have gotten more mature and refined since that 2018 study. So we got to go back and re-ask some of those questions to determine our assumptions, if they're correct. So I wouldn't say anything's ruled out yet, but like you asked Andy for his take on it, I'd say he just identified some real big challenges to overcome if we were going to move forward with one of those. Now, with those challenges come new opportunities, and those opportunities are what we're looking for. We're trying to look for opportunities to potentially get economies of scale. We're trying to lower costs. Those are things that you guys brought up. That's what's going to come out in these stakeholder engagements, and I'm excited because I think we're going to get more information at that level, and then that'll allow us to go from there. For sake of time purposes, though, I know Rob and Andy have kind of gone through their whole presentation. I wanted to make sure we allowed some conversation for initially discussing breakdown and separation of work. As far as the cost discussion, will go next week on Wednesday when we meet as a joint strategic planning. So, and before we get into that, I just wanted to say this presentation from Andy and Rob is the exact same presentation that they will be giving to the Water District next week. So this is how we decided to do it, is they're going to give the same presentation, and then we will all come together the afternoon that the Water District is meeting next Wednesday, and we'll have our joint meeting so that everybody will have seen the same information. Okay.
Does anybody know how far it is from our plant to the Bella Vista ATP? Anybody know a distance or ballpark?
I could find it in the 2018 study, but offhand, I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm just wondering how much, if we take it to DPR standards at our plant and send it up there to mix in, what type of pumping are we talking about to get it up there?
Director Barrett, the one thing I can say is no matter what option we were to go with out of the four, a pump will be involved one way or another, whether it's to Santa Barbara, up to Bella Vista, or out to Carpinteria. We have to pump it. We're sort of in an area that, Santa Barbara does have a pipeline to it, but you still got the lowest point in our collection system that has to get into a point on their collection system. So there's going to be a pump involved. It's just a matter of how big is that pump and how much TDH does it have to pump against. So anyway, but we can, what I'll do is I'll work with Carrie, Director Barrett, and we'll do some, we'll get you some rough numbers as far as what we see as some potential alignments and get that to you, so you have an idea, order of magnitude on how many miles of a pipeline that would be.
Quick question on Carpinteria, since Andy and Rob are up on all this activity over there, are they looking at going to indirect potable reuse by injecting in their basin? Or are they looking at purple pipe or both?
The former, purifying the water and injecting it into the basin.
So they're going the whole way then, they're going the gold standard. Okay.
Yep.
They're not even considered purple pipe then.
No, and I actually did this study that led to that recommendation, and it was just it takes a lot of pipe to get to everybody, and then the main customers are ag related, and they actually require pretty high quality water. And so you're going to have to add RO just to serve a lot of the agricultural customers, and so the incremental cost to go to advanced purification and then injecting, and then you get more water out of it, just made a whole lot more sense for Carpinteria.
And this is just another, so you guys are up on top of this. DPR passes in 2023. Will CARP look at DPR instead of indirect?
I don't think so, because I think Andy can expand on this a lot more, but it's a lot of additional steps to do it, and it's not necessarily cheap. Capital, O&M, labor, and so it's not that simple. And so that's where each community kind of has its own drivers, whereas like Santa Barbara has a surface water treatment plant that is going to have piping connected to it because of the desal plant. It makes a lot of sense. Whereas Carpinteria isn't close to a surface water treatment plant, and then that means they would need to go pipe to pipe, and that becomes even more complicated. So it
So
really depends on the local setting.
They're fixed on their direction then, is what I'm saying.
Yep.
What you're telling me is that they're going into indirect potable reuse, period, boom, done.
Yeah.
And if DPR comes along, great, but they're still going, they're going to their basin.
And to be clear, I'll let Andy chime in here, but to be clear, the potable reuse draft regulations that Andy mentioned before came out in, I think it was about March or so, are what we're all expecting the final regulations to be. There'll be changes, but so we have a very good idea of what it's going to be in 2023. It won't necessarily be this whole new reveal at that point. So that's what we're trying to get at a little bit earlier, is that we've got a pretty good idea of where this is headed. And so we can evaluate based on that today.
Well, as engineers, what I think of is, all right, it comes down the mountain, we get it to the water district, right? Everybody uses it through all the little houses, la, 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 la. And it comes down to our district, okay? And then we recycle it and we send it back up there as DPR, and la, 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 it comes down. And then we send it back up there again, it goes la, 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 la. Kind of like the Orange County thing, is what I envision at some point.
Yeah. So just a couple of quick thoughts. So first of all, non-potable reuse, if there's large agriculture, for example, or a large golf course or a cemetery, that can be a benefit, but it's a one-time use in the cycle. Potable reuse is a continual, you just hit it there, Director Barrett. It's a continual cycle. We lose a little bit because we kick off the brine. The benefit of a DPR, it can often be infrastructure costs. So there are DPR projects that are being looked at, and we're designing one right now in Texas where it is cheaper to do DPR because you don't have to move the water a long distance to go into a groundwater basin. But the benefit of IPR is the groundwater basin or the reservoir. It is storage. So storage is an important part, and you've got to look at, the water districts need to look at the whole portfolio, and is it really a good idea to save this basin over here and then and pump into it and then pull only when you need it, for example. So it's a complex picture.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'd forgotten about the storage, piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Very important, especially during the droughts, which we seem to be in again.
Right. And we will be again. Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to kick off the discussion on some of the cost sharing, and I invite Andy and Rob to stay on the line, and so they can help answer any questions too, as far as some of the details, as far as what went into those numbers and how we got there. But Director Barrett and Director Johnson, the reason I asked Andy and Rob to pull out the table the way it is here is task number 2 here, that 500 hours for Montecito Sanitary District Wastewater Treatment Plant Mini Master Plan. That's a really important element, and I'm glad Andy highlighted it earlier. In order to fully understand which option is going to be in the best interest for the community as a whole down the road, we really have to have a good handle on costs, both operational costs, but also capital replacement costs for the infrastructure that is currently here to meet all regulatory standards. with or without recycled water, we still need to understand that information. And so that's something that, let's just assume if we did not move forward with this, I would still be coming back to the board down the road to get a engineering consultant like an Andy and a Rob to come back in and help us with that mini master plan. Because it's really important for us as we start going down this road of what does our treatment plant look like for the next 30, 50 years. We need to understand, and they're calling it a mini master plan because it's a high level master plan. There might be follow-up studies that are needed, but this is where Carrie and I have talked with the team about supplying some of our own hours to help with some of the condition assessment data and get in there and really get an understanding where are the vulnerabilities. Director Barrett, you and I have had great conversations about some of the natural disasters we've had and where is the district vulnerability. Our treatment plan is one of them from one of the biggest potential ones we have, which is an earthquake. So some of the elements in here are addressing structural components here at the treatment plant that haven't really been addressed for the, since the treatment plant was put in place. We've got minor fixes here and there. But that's where I would like our district to start from a contribution of both labor of our team to support it, as well as a cost standpoint, because most of the other items of work either are all 100% recycled water elements. Some of them are project management. You'll see in task 1, these are project management type duties. In task 5, those could be split 50-50, however you guys would want to discuss that. But I think from the district's perspective that task 2, 500 hours out of that task 2 would be the right place to start from a budgeting and support standpoint. And I'll tell you that the dollar value that ends up around that 500 hours is a little higher than what you saw in the budget last a couple weeks ago, but it's in line. It's in an order of magnitude of what we budgeted for this fiscal year. So that's what I'd like to start with, and I'd love to take any questions from Director Barrett or Director Johnson on the cost sharing element so that we can be prepared for next Wednesday's discussion.
I mean, this is something we really haven't discussed in detail in the Strategic Planning Committee joint meetings with the Water District. I'm open to any suggestions as to how these things happen. Andy, at this point in time, with this type of feasibility study, you've already got the Woodard, I keep referring to the Woodard and Kern, that's what I like to call it, initial feasibility study. Now we're in the Water District pay for 100% of that. Of course, they got the grant, which is great. In other districts where you've worked and done these same type of things, how is this split up, or is it split up, or what happens, at this point in your experience? And I'm not saying every single time, just the majority of the time.
Yeah, I don't have a single answer to that. I apologize. Again, it depends on the drivers. I think that Brad's starting point, if I can answer this one, I think Brad's starting point is reasonable. I think that clearly anything related to upgrades at the wastewater treatment plant or looking to a future fully replaced wastewater treatment plant, that the majority of that benefit goes to you, right? And I think that it's fair to say that managing the project in meetings, you could split those. I think that, but I think that, so where you end up with is in that 600 to 700 hour range. I think that to me, and again, I don't know enough, right, about everybody, but if you assign value to each task, I think it's in that range of value to you at the sanitary district.
So I guess I'm confused in that I thought this was a feasibility study to look at implementing recycle in the 4 different areas that you had in your previous slides. So now it's also taking the scope of retrofitting our plant, running 2 systems at once before we terminate and demolish one system in the future. Now Brad brings up earthquake.
Sure, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Where are we looking at recycling here? Or are we looking at,
right,
master plan for our plant?
Sure. Yeah. And maybe I've created some confusion there. Brad, do you want to go first, or I'd be happy to chip in?
Yeah, let me lay the groundwork, Andy, and then you can explain off of that. These 4 alternatives, Director Barrett, some of the alternatives would not necessarily require a fully functioning treatment plant as you see it currently. You know, so when we talk about sending raw water somewhere, that means that Montecito's treatment plant is not necessarily required for any level of treatment for those options. So if we get down the road and that is the option, the cost of operating a treatment plant here essentially would not exist. That is one thing we're evaluating. However, if the option, the alternative that we're now analyzing is that we are going to be providing treatment here in some form, whether it's sending somebody partially or fully treated wastewater before they treat it onto advanced standards, we are still going to have to operate this facility. So it's an analysis that needs to happen in order to really get an idea when we evaluate costs as part of that factor of the overall model of deciding what happens down the road. That's how I interpret it. And so, Director Barrett, it's not that we've added this in as an extra element. It's something that's baked into needing to do recycled water. Now, my point is if recycled water, the direction and the boards don't want to come to an agreement on this is the scope of work, this is the contract they want to execute, we at the district still need a master plan for the treatment plant, because we are going to need to continue maintaining all of our regulatory standards for our NPDES permit, regardless of what the future recycled water is. And especially if that future recycled water takes 5, 10, 15 years, there might be equipment here that needs to be replaced before that. And that's where bringing Andy and Rob and their team in to help us identify what are some of those, you know, the useful life of that piece of equipment, the structural vulnerabilities of our treatment plant, especially as it pertains to natural disasters. Those are the elements that I feel like our team needs regardless of what the future is. And so I'm not saying that that element of work is only for us. It's definitely going to be used for the treatment plant, but I guess my point is it's a dual purpose. We can use it for the analysis, for deciding what is the right option for Montecitans in the future for recycled water, but we can also use it for better planning of our own facility as it currently stands, and for the near future for a replacement cycle of assets. So hope that it helps expand on it.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, that decision on whether if the best alternative is to send raw effluent. So essentially Montecito becomes like Goleta West. We are not processing effluent anymore.
Yeah.
Essentially we're a pipeline company. We keep the pipes clean. That's what we do. Just like Goleta West. And they pay Goleta some amount of money to process their effluent.
Yeah.
So there's already, luckily we got, you know, one right next door that's doing that.
Yeah.
But it seems like to me the feasibility study has to be done to figure out which way is the best way to go. And then our district, you know, how does it impact us? Are we going to be treating effluent, not treating effluent? Are we going to put a machine in and recycle to the gold standard? You know, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
So I can understand both sides of the fence, but it seems like until a decision is made from this feasibility study with the two districts, sanitary and water, making a decision on which one to, you know, pursue, our district really doesn't know what it's going to do as far as down the line once one of these avenues is chosen.
Correct. That mini master plan, though, Director Barrett, is an input into helping make that decision. We can't really figure out what the cost of service is here for the next 30 years with and therefore not compare it to what the cost of service is if we send it to Santa Barbara for treatment or to Carpinteria for treatment. We can't compare apples to apples without some understanding of what our level of treatment is and cost of operations is going to be without this. So it's sort of, I don't want to, this is sort of the chicken or the egg. And I think you're thinking the egg comes after the chicken here, and I'm thinking that egg comes before the chicken. Either way, it's part of the analysis that needs to happen. And so this is why we're calling it a mini master plan. We're not calling this the end all be all master plan for the facility. This is really a stripped down version of the master plan. And that's why when Carrie and I met with Andy and Rob to look at the level of effort, we pulled out what we thought we could to do internally to get us a good picture, so that, but it still leaves enough information for Andy and Rob to help with the analysis and give us the right key information for making that evaluation. So,
but it just seems like to me, say there's 4 avenues here. It seems like to me you're doing 4 times the work, because if you're trying to decide what the impact is going to be on the district if we send raw effluent, and if we put in a machine and treat to gold standard. And if we do this and if we do that, you're looking at 4 different alternatives for our district to go and evaluating the impact and the cost to operate that entity when 3 of those are not going to exist. We're only going to use 1.
Mhm.
So it seems like once the 1 is picked, that's the time to come in and fine tune what is the impact and what does our district do? I mean, I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. You like to be pre-prepared. I do too. But you're talking about doing it for all avenues. How's it going to affect our district? And we haven't even picked an avenue yet. It
Correct.
just seems like extra work on top of what these gentlemen are trying to produce with this feasibility study.
Yeah.
Am I looking at it wrong or?
And maybe Andy can add a little bit to what I'm suggesting, but in order, one element of what we're looking at is cost of service and disposal. Bare minimum, proper treatment and disposal of a wastewater is the first, and whether that means disposing to another agency, disposing here at the treatment plant, and putting it into a facility. That's one element of this. Is we got to handle cost of disposal and cost of service here at the treatment plant. At the same time, there are other factors that are going to be evaluated here through this process. It's not just cost. It's also about reliability. It's also about the socioeconomic factors that go into it. There's an entire model that gets taken into account to figure out what is the right decision for Montecitans. So this cost element is one. It's a very important one because we always want to be cost effective, but we also need to be reliable. We also need to be resilient to changing environmental standards down the road. And then again, obviously meeting all regulatory compliance, both on the disposal of wastewater, but also on the now producing potable water. So the angle that I've been coming from this is Carollo and WSC has suggested and included this, and Andy can add on to some of those reasons, but they've suggested this. And so from a baseline discussion standpoint, I fully support that it's included in the scope of work. And I just wanted our board to understand that I see this being a secondary benefit. So we get kind of, we kill 2 birds with 1 stone because it can be used for dual purposes and helping with some of these other goals that our board has talked about getting grant funding for our current infrastructure and continuing to maintain that. Now, of course, if the plan changes, then you're right, we run the risk of this plan saying, well, we thought we were going to be needing to replace things over the next 30 years, but maybe that changes, but we still have a plan. That document, that paperwork is still there and it's beneficial for us. So, and for grant funding and that kind of thing. Andy, did you want to add to?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is all well said. And again, I maybe graphically or some better way I could have presented this. So I'll just take just a brief moment. The first steps in this, and just to remind everybody, is to have these conversations with Carpinteria and Santa Barbara. And in those conversations, it'll be, along the lines of, is there a possibility that you would be interested in participating in a future full implementation type project? And if the answer to that is, yeah, there's a possibility, it depends on the economics, et cetera, then the project moves forward with those options. And through that options with those utilities, and Director Barrett, you mentioned some costs up in Goleta, if we're sending raw wastewater or secondary effluent, either direction, there'll be a cost assigned to that, so many dollars per acre foot. And that dollars, those would be paid to those outside agencies for them to take your water and do what they need to do with it. And embedded within those costs, and they'll be ballpark, but embedded with that is they got to figure out the wastewater treatment side. If they need to expand, it's in that cost. If they need to add chemicals, it's in that cost. If they need to fix some rebar or some concrete walls, it's in that cost, right? And so we're going to get that cost and we're going to stare at it and we're going to say, okay, $400 an acre foot or something. I mean, I'm throwing out a number. You're going to stare at it and you're going to say, okay, well, how does that compare to our own cost to operate our facility, which we have a sunk asset. We've got value in the facility. And so then you look at your facility and you say, okay, well, look, we really do need to fix some things. And some of these are oil and grease related, but some of them are just, we have to fix the things because we're going to be making water for 20 years out of this facility or 30 more years. And so the mini master plan is saying, okay, we're going to look at the whole facility and look at electrical, look at structural, look at process and control and monitoring. And we're going to say, okay, at the bare minimum, here's the cost to fix things and get them ready for the next 20 to 30 years. And then we're looking at the higher option, membrane bioreactor, which is like the latest thing that you would do. Now there's stuff in between, but we're not looking at all those. And so we're going to set the high and low costs for water production from your facility. And then that combines with the purified water treatment costs from your facility. And that gets $1 per acre foot value, which then gets compared to the cost to send and move water in different directions. So, you know, essentially, and this concept evolved as we were developing the scope together with the water district and the sanitary district, is it's actually, if you don't have it, you can't make a decision because you don't know your own costs looking into the future.
Mhm.
So this 1,870 hours includes the impact on the sanitary district for the 4 different approaches here. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay,
Yes.
so it's already embedded in these hours presented. Okay, interesting. No, I can see how it all ties together. In your last, explanation, and you guys have met and discussed this at length, I'm sure, to come up with these numbers.
I
So
think-
I'm just kind of looking at it from outside the forest here.
How many times, Andy and Rob, have you met on this?
Countless.
Yeah.
This is setting a new record for meetings on a scope, actually, for
Yeah.
me. So it's
Lots of
fine,
coffee.
which is fine. I'm not complaining.
Mm.
Yeah. Rob, where are you located?
I'm in San Luis Obispo.
Okay.
So
And then
it's
you're
not
in
far.
Ventura, Andy?
Yep, I'm in Ventura.
So you guys have been doing Zoom. You're not meeting at the local Starbucks then?
No, if Rob wants to drive down here, I'll meet
Yeah.
him anytime.
Yep.
And vice versa, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that answered all my questions. I mean, I don't know how we're going to make a report from this committee to the board with the depth we've gone into today. Would it be worth it, Brad, to have this presentation in a shorter format without me asking too many questions, obviously, to the entire board next week on the
Yes,
22nd?
Yes, Director Barrett. So I do want to open up any questions from Director Johnson too, but to answer your specific question, our plan is to distribute this to our board. They were invited to participate as public participants since they're not on the committee today, so they weren't able to actively participate, but they were able to listen in. Like I said, this will be going to the Montecito Water Board on next Wednesday, and then Director Johnson and yourself, Director Barrett, will be at a joint meeting where there will be another larger discussion next Wednesday. Our next board meeting, our next general board meeting will be on Thursday, the day after our joint meeting, where we will be looking for some form of action or recommendation at that meeting. So no action needed today. We wanted to present the information to you. You can make a recommendation if you want, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary today. We do want to get, I'm glad Andy and Rob did talk about the schedule. We do want to get clarification on this. And I know the water district's very interested in moving forward. They don't want to waste too much time on this. But like Andy and Rob have been working on this for several months, we do want to get some resolution and moving forward. And it may start with that conversation next week on cost sharing, on how we share the cost with the water district. So that's why the agenda is written the way it is. It's really just for a presentation and discussion purpose. So
Wednesday, this is going to be presented in the morning to the water district, and then we have our joint strategic in the afternoon. Is that right?
yes, 2 p.m. on Wednesday, the 21st.
Is the joint strategic?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So this is 9 o'clock next Wednesday at the water district? Is that right?
I believe so, whenever the water district has their meeting posted. But I do know it's Wednesday morning on the 21st before the joint.
Doreen, would it be proper for Betsy to send out notice to the other 3 directors to hopefully watch this at 9 o'clock next Wednesday on the water district Zoom?
That would be a good suggestion.
Yeah.
I think so for that particular meeting on the.
Because if we present this, Brad, next Thursday at our board meeting, we're not going to have Andy and Rob there. It's just going to be this PowerPoint. Is that correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
Carrie just looked it up. It's 9:30 a.m. Next Wednesday is when the water
Okay.
district meets. So
Well, I would highly suggest, because Rob and Andy, you guys are going to be there next Wednesday morning at
The
9:30,
exact same
right?
presentation. Mhm.
So our other three board of director guys, if they're available, they should be there to ask any questions, as they're going to be members of the public.
Yeah.
So they can
And-
ask a question at the water district, right?
Correct. They can't.
They
as
can't
members
talk,
of the
they
public.
can't talk to each other. That's a Brown Act violation. I understand that. But as ratepayers, they can ask Rob and Andy questions during the 9:30 meeting, if they have any, next Wednesday, if they tune in to the water district 9:30 presentation, right?
Correct. And
Okay.
if there are any other questions, we can always facilitate those to Andy and Rob so that we can have it ready for our discussion on Thursday as well. So we weren't planning for Rob and Andy's time's sake to bring them back in for an extra meeting, since they're already doing 2 full meetings.
Yeah.
But we're interested in getting a resolution on moving forward with this contract. So I know they're going to be motivated to help answer any of your questions if something comes up between now and then. So let's just keep that in mind, and definitely contact myself or Duran, and she can forward it to me, and I can make sure that we get
Yeah.
clarification on those items. Duran, I apologize because I know we've been talking a lot. Did you have a question or anything you wanted to add or ask?
No, I think that everything's been cleared. I think there's been a lot of good questions, and hopefully Andy and Rob could just give me a little bit more of a idea of the cost factor, and I guess that would be really helpful. And they could be working with you, Brad, on that too. Okay.
Correct. And Director Johnson, I can give you a rough idea. Andy earlier today talked about the whole level of effort is around $420,000 for everything, and I believe that excludes
Saw that number. Yeah, I saw that number. It'd be great if I could just get a breakdown of like the task 2. That seems the most hours, and this infrastructure, because that actually will hopefully benefit us, as what you had mentioned. So again, I just want to get more of a little crystal clear on the breakdown of the numbers, and that'd be really helpful in order for us to move forward in the direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Director Johnson, I will work with my staff to email you and Director Barrett with the proposal, the way it stands, just the fee sheet, so you can see, and I will highlight the items that make up the 500 hours so that you can see how we came up with that. But essentially,
That would be great. And I
it's about
think
25% of the overall number.
Okay, so if I'm clear, and I don't want to repeat myself or repeat the question if it's been asked, on the task 2, they will be looking at the carpinteria where the wastewater, someone mentioned it, where it could possibly all the wastewater goes to carp. And then my question would be, and maybe they could answer this, what impact would that create for our district if all the wastewater goes to carp? There's kind of a question there that kind of came up in my mind when they made that announcement.
Andy, I'll take the first stab at it, and then you can explain any of the impacts that I missed on it. So depending on the analysis that's completed here, there's actually 2 out of 3 options that are being evaluated by Corolla on this.
Yeah,
If we send raw wastewater, so we pump all the wastewater raw without any form of treatment here, essentially that will go to Carpinteria for their treatment and use for whatever their IPR project turns out to be. That would potentially eliminate the need for treatment here at the plant, at the current facility. If for some reason Carpinteria was not interested in that option and they wanted to go with us performing treatment to some level here, going to either secondary or advanced and sending them advanced treated water there, we would still have to have a facility here. So that's where that facility mini master plan kind of comes in handy and has a nexus there, is to understand what are those 2 options and what does it essentially take off the books there. Of course, we have an outfall, so any use of outfall, meaning we have to discharge any water, we have to handle that one way or another, because if we have to do some level of treatment here, that means we also need to be able to take any byproduct of that water and dispose of it to all legal standards. That might mean we need to manage an outfall here at the treatment plant. So that's kind of how I envision those two options going, based on what we've been told so far by Carpinteria and what Andy and Rob have included in the proposal. Did I miss anything, Andy? Was there another?
I've got nothing to add to that.
Okay. So, yeah, so the Carpinteria option is being evaluated as option, as part of task 2.
That would also give us an idea, and they would suggest the equipment or the infrastructure that we would need if we, it'd be less probably infrastructure or new equipment if it goes to CARP, all of it, right?
Depending on the type of, again, whatever option with Carpinteria that, as we explore that, if it's treatment, there's certain levels of treatment equipment that would need to be put on the plant. If it's raw wastewater, yes, most likely you're looking at swapping out pumps and handling things because you have an entirely different pipeline you have to pump into than what we currently pump here at the facility. That would really get evaluated much more in depth at that time. And one thing that we haven't really talked about in depth, but that oil and grease, Director Barrett brought it up. Other agencies are going to have limits on what they're willing to take from us. So when we say raw wastewater, they might not be happy with what we see coming into our treatment plant every day the way it is now. Luckily, we're a mostly residential community. There is a level of oil and grease, but it's not significantly high for what a facility could handle down the road. They just, like Andy mentioned, they might have to make incremental improvements in order to handle the material we give them. But at the end of the day, that's going to get factored in and built into that rate that they charge us to take their water or take our water. So therefore, we might need some preliminary equipment here to handle some of that, depending on what the option ends up being. So I can't 100% give you exact, types of infrastructure. Neither can roll at this point.
Okay, that will be done in phase 2. Okay. I mean, we will have clarity for us because if we have those 4 different phases, it'd be good to kind of, that's why I wanted to see kind of more of a breakdown of costs and then how that would really impact our district.
And before a final contract would get signed, Director Johnson, Andy, Rob, and I can work on, and I'm sure the water district would be interested in this as well, work on providing a little bit more of a detailed schedule in the proposal. Right now, it's really here are all the duties that they're going to perform for us and all the services they're going to provide the districts. We're sort of missing this phased approach, and I think that's what Andy was saying. He could have broken up the presentation a little differently to kind of walk through the phase of how the work progresses. But built in currently, it does talk about phases. We just don't have a simple graphic to kind of show how this works. So maybe we can work on enhancing that before we get a final contract.
It'd be helpful. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. That's all I have for today, but I feel like this was a healthy discussion. I will transfer it back to Director Barrett. Since you were leading the meeting.
And I just want to add, I don't know how to take my screen sharing off. So if someone go ahead and do that. I don't know how to do it.
Let's see if we can,
That's okay. It looks nice.
Yeah,
Fine.
it's fine.
It's fine. We have a
Right.
small group here. That's
Okay.
fine, Andy. But thank you so much for the presentation. It was very
Yes.
informative and it gives me some idea. It's something that I definitely want, and I think our community deserves to look at the recycle. Our ratepayers are interested. It's just trying to get there. So, but I appreciate the time and effort. I know this is like the second or third time that I met you. But thank you so much for coming again for this meeting. Okay.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. We're very glad to try to help.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, so if not, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Andy. So
Thank you.
that being said, is there any last minute questions? If not, we could probably adjourn. Would someone like to make a motion or we just say goodbye?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, and I'll second that. So thank you guys and we'll talk soon. Okay,
Great.
thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
talk to you soon,
Bye.
Brad.